Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Samari, the Executive Vice Chancellor of the University of Kansas Medical Center. And thank you, Dr. McGee, Vice Chancellor McGee, for the invitation to join you today for the Native American Heritage Month. This event is sponsored by KUMC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Cabinet Programming Committee. We offer today a very warm welcome to U.S. Representative Sharice Davids from Kansas 3rd District as our featured speaker today. We're very grateful, Representative Davids, for your support of the Medical Center and our community, and very much look forward to continuing the great things we've done together and going forward as well. Also in our audience today, we welcome our Chancellor, Dr. Doug Girard, and Dr. Ronald Graham, the President of Haskell Indian Nations University. Welcome, Dr. Graham. We're pleased that you're going to spend an hour with us sharing this important visit.
Nice
So introducing our guest presenter today is Dr. Rachel D Teresi, Assistant Professor and Assistant Clerkship Director in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in the School of Medicine. Dr. D Teresi.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi and good afternoon. My name is Rachel D Teresi, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of OBGYN here at KU Medical Center. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker today. As a person who identifies as Native American, I was thrilled to hear in 2018 that a Native American woman was running for Congress in my district. I had the opportunity to hear Representative Davids speak during her campaign, and her words were powerful. I will never forget a response she had to a question posed about running for Congress. She stated, "I looked around the room at those in charge and recognized that I can do that." Those words resonated and provided inspiration to me. She continues to be a role model for not only myself, but women, Kansans, and the Native American people. Representative Davis was raised by a single mother who served in the Army for 20 years. After graduating from Leavenworth High School, she worked her way through Johnson County Community College and the University of Missouri, Kansas City, before earning a law degree from Cornell Law School. As a first-generation college student who worked the entire time she was in college, Representative Davids understands the importance of quality public schools and affordable higher education. It is that foundation that allowed her to go on to a successful career, focused on economic and community development, which included time as a White House Fellow under President Barack Obama. When she was sworn into the 116th Congress, Representative Davids became one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress. Representative Davids has centered her work in office on putting Kansans first, fighting to limit the influence of special interests and make the healthcare more affordable and accessible to everyone. She is a resident of Roland Park. Please welcome Representative Davids.
Hello, good morning. Is it still morning? Oh, well. I hope everybody's doing all right today. It's kind of cold and rainy out there, but I'm excited that we get to come together in this way. Hopefully when we're on the other side of this thing, we can all see each other in person again for these types of events. Well, and thanks for having this event. Thanks for inviting me to participate, and Rachel, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. It's very nice. And then I can't see everybody because there's a lot of people on here, which is pretty cool. But I hope all of you are able to just hold up okay during what I think is probably one of the, this is kind of a traumatic time for our country, for our communities, and certainly I have a feeling for a lot of you. So thank you for the work you're doing, and just, yeah, I appreciate you all. Well, I feel like the intro gave a good bit about my my background, I am a proud Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. My family and my tribe is all in Wisconsin. My mom was in the Army for 20 years and retired while she was stationed at Fort Leavenworth. So I graduated from high school there, and that's how a Ho-Chunk ends up in Kansas, or at least this one in my family. But I also am really, really proud to have been part of this historic class, the freshman class in 2018 that got elected. Was just, it was a real honor to be part of that, because not only did we have a lot of firsts, I got to be one of the firsts alongside Deb Holland to be the first 2 Native women to serve in Congress. And, you know, I think that one of the things that we got to see was a resetting of expectations about what it means to support people who are running for office, the types of folks who are running for office. And Rachel, when you were saying that sometimes I would find myself looking around the room and seeing the decision makers and thinking, why not someone like me with my lived experience? You know, the value of bringing a different perspective to the table when we're talking about making policies that impact every single one of us. I think that the value of that can't be overstated. So I did want to kind of talk just for a few minutes about, you know, I think that this month is, I feel very fortunate and a ton of gratitude because Native Heritage Month is a time when we get the chance often to learn. There are a lot of conversations, a lot of information that gets shared about Native history. And I think that one of the things that I'm so excited about these days is that there are a lot of current issues and things that Native people face in the here and now that we often don't hear as much about because we often hear just kind of a historical context. And it's one of the reasons that I think it's so exciting that we saw record numbers of Native people and Native women running for office and winning elections. And one of the things that happens is that we get the chance to kind of highlight that, you know, there are issues, infrastructure issues, healthcare issues, education issues, you know, broadband. And I'm sure you all probably talk a bit about broadband because of the implications on telemedicine and all the different impacts that can have. And, you know, Native communities face all of those issues in the here and now. But we also have so many Native communities that are have so many successes, revitalizing languages and revitalizing connections to ceremony and have very strong kinship bonds and things that are very, very valuable in terms of just ways of being and living and existing with each other. And I think that those are some of the successes and the kind of beauty of Native communities that sometimes we don't hear about because either we're just talking about a historical context or we're trying to figure out ways to address issues that are having a negative impact on communities. But I do love to be able to say that you know, there are tribes like my tribe, Ho-Chunk is, we have a lot of folks who are getting the chance to learn the Ho-Chunk language. I spent some time on the Pine Ridge Reservation. There's a lot of language preservation and revitalization going on. And so there's a lot of really amazing stuff happening in tribal communities as well. And I just like to kind of mention that and highlight it. And then I think, so I do want to try, I hope we get a chance to do some Q&A, because I feel like, surprise, surprise, members of Congress can just kind of talk a lot for a long time. But I kind of want to, I guess, just touch on a couple of things when it comes to policy and how federal policy impacts Indian country and how it plays that major role. There are things that I've had the chance to work on in my first session of Congress. I got the chance this morning to sit down virtually with Whip Jim Clyburn, and he brought up how it'll be a podcast. Maybe we can send it around to folks, but he brought up that we get the chance in the next Congress to build on so much of what we were doing in the current session of Congress. And then he said that now that I've been reelected, I'm a real member of Congress. And so I'm just going to highlight that right now, because I'm excited to have Congressman Jim Clyburn say that I'm a real member of Congress now. It feels good. But some of the stuff we're going to build on is things like land recognition. You know, tribes and the federal government, there are a lot of different treaties that are the basis of tribal standing and the federal recognition of tribal sovereignty. And some of the stuff that I got the chance to work on was getting more land into trust and recognized as tribal lands by the federal government. There's a tribe in Massachusetts called the Mashpee Wampanoag that we passed a bill this year to recognize land that they've been trying to get recognized as their homelands for a long time. We've worked on things like addressing some of the native voting rights issues that happen. And some folks might have seen North Dakota had some laws that were passed a few years ago that made it really hard for tribal members who were living on reservation in very rural communities to be able to vote. So we were able to pass and work on the Native American Voting Rights Act. We also got the chance to make sure that tribes and tribal governments were included when we passed the CARES Act. There was $8 billion of funding for tribal governments in the CARES Act, so that, you know, the personal protective equipment and the testing and all the things that are necessary were actually getting to the Native communities. And then one of the things I got the chance to work on was the Paycheck Protection Program, which was really designed to help our small business owners and entrepreneurial community. Was initially, it was going to be hard for tribal folks to get to make use of that. And so I led an effort of about 37 of us, House members and Senate and senators, and it was bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans came together to make sure that that tribes would be able to access the Paycheck Protection Program. And so those are some of the things that I got a chance to work on. And then the last one I'll touch on is probably the one that I feel like is the most kind of the thing that I'll think about going forward into the future, which is the murdered and missing Indigenous women crisis that has been impacting Native communities for a really long time. And this past year, we were able to pass Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act, which are landmark pieces of legislation to combat this crisis. And these bills help make sure that we see increased transparency and data collection, because I think a lot of us know we can't really address issues if we don't know, if we don't have the data. And then, making sure that tribes are able to coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies and the Department of Justice to really address the murdered and missing Indigenous women crisis, because unfortunately, the incidences and this pandemic has exacerbated some of this, but there's the increased rates and higher rates of domestic and sexual violence, and Native women and girls are disproportionately impacted by these things. So I think that's, I wanted to kind of touch on just a few of those things, and then I definitely hope that we can get some, I don't know who's going to be asking. There's so many tiles here. Oh, Rachel, are you going to be running the show?
Yeah, well,
perfect.
I will be moderating some question and answer session with Kimberly Connolly. So if you're ready to move on, we can go ahead and move on to our first question that we have from our audience. So can you tell us what events led you to know that you were the person who should take the Native American voice to the House of Representatives?
That's an interesting question. I think actually, so full disclosure, I didn't realize, and I don't know what this says actually, it can be a good thing and a bad thing. I didn't realize that we had never had a Native woman in Congress before. Mm. And in some ways, I'm glad I didn't realize it, because I probably would have been mad, but I also recognized the reason that I didn't realize it it wasn't because I just thought that I didn't think it was a thing that was possible. It's because I just assumed, with all of the Native women that I know that are amazing leaders, that are smart, that are driven, that are passionate, that are all the things you would want to see in a member of Congress. I was just surprised that it hadn't happened already. And so it was really interesting to have the conversations with Deb Haaland when we were both running, of like, it feels like a really big deal that it wasn't necessarily the driving force. I mean, the main thing, and specifically why I decided to run for Congress in the time that I did it, because it was not part of my, I didn't spend 4 years getting my associates and then 4 more years getting my bachelor's while working all manner of jobs, thinking this is, I'm on my path to Congress, and I'm going to be the first Native woman in Congress. But I did see that I was not satisfied with the representation that we had in my predecessor, and it was big and small things, from votes to the fact that there wasn't a 3rd district congressional office in KCK. It was one of those things where I just kind of had certain expectations and those weren't being met. The first thing I did was try to find somebody to run. I asked a number of other women if they would run for the seat. And then I asked myself that question, well, if I'm trying to find somebody to do something about this, why not me? Maybe I should think about whether or not I can be part of addressing what I perceive to be an issue. And so it was one of those things where, as I got going, and now that I'm in Congress, and now that I'm a real member of Congress, I do sometimes think how it's pretty wild that I was like, you know what, I'm going to run for Congress. And I'm so glad I did it, but it was, it's an interesting journey.
Wow, we really appreciate your having that thought and that ambition and how it came about. I also just want to say I really appreciate everything you've said so far, especially the work you've been doing. And I know the the payment protection plan?
Oh, yeah.
That was really important for a lot of small businesses, and I'm sure for a lot of people that was really important. So thank you for your work on that. I'm sure like the impact on individuals and their families is so huge. You can't even imagine how much that has helped. So we do have some more questions that were submitted to us. So the next question is, Representative David, it feels like the Native American population has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. What can we do at the local, state, and federal level to ensure that the Native American population has access to COVID-19 resources and the medical care that they need?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Hold on, I'm always cold, so I have a little space heater on, but it's kind of loud. So I'm going to turn it off to make sure that I can hear when you're asking questions. There's a couple of things that I think about. So I think you all probably know this, like so many things are structural. You know, there are a lot of structural barriers, and some of that is in policy. So for tribal communities, one of the things that I've been pushing for, I'm surprised I didn't mention this earlier. One of the things that I have been pushing for, alongside not just Deb Haaland, but like Tom Cole, who's a Native member on the Republican side, is making sure that the appropriations, that the money is actually available for Indian Health Service. And not just Indian Health Service, but also our urban Indian health centers, because there's a lot of Native population that don't live on reservations, and so we have to make sure that the funding is there so that tribal members are still have the access to care that they're supposed to have. Whether it's through Indian Health Service or an urban. And then, so some of it is, it's very strange to be a member of Congress and also know and have been a person who's made use of Indian Health Service and seen kind of firsthand. I have an interesting story. Actually, I used to do martial arts. I was a mixed martial arts fighter for a little while. I had 6 amateur fights and 2 professional fights. I wish I could say I won all my fights, but one time in training, I got hit in the ear with a shin. I got kicked in the ear, and I started to get, I don't know if anybody's familiar with cauliflower ear. Wrestlers get it a lot and stuff, you know, your ear kind of swells up. And I went in, I was living on the res, so I went into IHS, and the doctor who saw me didn't know what cauliflower ear was, and which I thought was interesting, but he looked inside my ear and was like, I can give you some drops. And I was like, I don't need drops. My ear is, I need you to like drain my ear. And he was like, basically he was like, fine, I'll give you pain medications. I don't remember which specific one he said, but I was like, I didn't even say I was in pain. So I don't know why you would offer. So there were 2 issues. One was the doctor wasn't listening to me as the patient. And then 2, he offered me a pain medication that I didn't even ask for. And when we've got some of the incidences of substance use, it like raised a bunch of alarms for me. This was long before I ever thought I was going to run for Congress. But that's the kind of thing where I recognize that, first of all, we have a lot of burnout in the healthcare field. And I'm like preaching to the choir here. And it's very true in Indian Health Service as well, because a lot of times the appropriations are just not there in the way they need to be. And then the second thing is that that's not as strong, that's not a good indication about some of the cultural competencies that need to be included. But there are definitely also some cultural competencies that I think are really important when folks are doing work on tribal lands. And then that's like the healthcare aspect. And then there's the transportation and infrastructure aspect. From my view, there are so many barriers that exist because folks, there are lots of communities where not all the roads are paved, where, you know, the distance that folks have to travel, you know, having to go over 90 miles to get to the closest doctor. And then making sure that the broadband access is there, and for all manner of things, the telehealth, of course, but also just kind of your basic functioning of so much of this stuff. So those are the kinds of things we're working on, and I think that that's primarily from the federal level, but for urban Indian needs, I do think that there's the possibility of being able to work with state and local governments to help facilitate and make sure that the funding is getting where it needs to be. I realized I got like really in to the.
That's okay. I just have to say, so impressed that you did mixed martial arts. Those are some of the best athletes, and I'm glad you didn't get cauliflower ear.
Oh, me too.
You're too pretty for that. And yes, thanks for making sure. And third, probably good for us that you weren't really, really successful as a mixed martial arts, because you might not be here today, right? You'd be out fighting on UFC fights.
UFC or something.
So, yeah. I did wonder, and this is a question kind of based on from what you just said. I'm not sure everybody on the call understands the Indian Health Services. Can you just briefly explain how that works differently than the, like, you know, money wise, maybe how money goes?
Yeah, for sure. So even, I guess I also want to take even a step back from that, is that everything, when we're talking about dealing with tribal governments and that sort of thing, everything tribal is inherently federal. There's a federal tie to it, because the relationship between the federal government and tribal governments is rooted in the U.S. Constitution and treaty rights. And so so many of the treaties that the federal government, and then even like the French government, the British government, before the United States was even a country, so many of the treaties where, you know, certain lands or agreements not to fight were made, basically set up the system where Indian Health Service or access to healthcare was part of that promise that was made in exchange for so many of the things that were, I'm being diplomatic, that were given up or agreed to. And so I think that one of the things that I think a lot of times people aren't aware of, because the historical context is like often just like left out, is Indian Health Service exists because of agreements made between tribal governments and the federal government, and that's through treaties and statutes. And so right now, the way it works is Indian Health Service gets appropriations, but they happen on similar to other departments, on an annual basis. And truly, if the federal government is going to adhere to both the treaty rights and also what's called the federal trust responsibility to tribal nations, if we, the federal government, would truly live up to those, then advanced appropriations is what they call it, but making sure that the funding is there at the beginning of the year and in advance, so that we're not running into budget shortfalls and that sort of thing for the hospital system that is on reservations and in Native communities. Is that helpful? Sometimes I feel like
Thank you.
They say if you're able to explain it to an 8-year-old, but I don't. I think I'm glad that everybody on here is
Right.
knows. You guys probably know more than me about a bunch of this stuff.
You know, 2 years ago, we watched a documentary about the Indian Health Service. And so I began to barely understand kind of that relationship. And it just makes me wonder if everybody on the call, you know, has that knowledge. A lot of them probably do, but not everyone. So thank you for explaining that. That was
I appreciate you asking that.
Dr. Teresi?
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for your words and bringing up Indian Health Services. I mean, I also grew up as an urban Indian, and I received Indian Health Services in Lawrence when I was in college and medical school. So I utilized the services and appreciated them very much. So I've been in that and actually worked at Indian Health Services for a brief time before medical school. So it's just good to hear that, you know, thinking about the funding going forward, because there's so many health disparities, not even just with COVID, but also just women's health. I'm an OBGYN, so I know a lot about the women health disparities, not only tribal, our tribal Indian population, but also in our urban population. So it's good to hear. I guess the only thing I don't really know very much about is then where is the funding for the urban facilities? Because I know that they're not necessarily the same.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is the appropriations, when we go through the appropriations portion of that, so many of the programs for urban Indian health centers right now, we send such a small percentage as it relates to who lives in which geographies, like how many folks live on reservations and how many folks are urban Native population. And the dollar amounts are just they're insufficient. And so I know in my office and Deb Holland, we're constantly working on just trying to make sure that, you know, the urban Indian health centers that do their contracting with Indian Health Service, that there's more of those contracting dollars available, that we're making sure that we're making sure that the contracts are available, but that the like literal line items are much bigger, because the percentage is so low. I want to say it's 1 to 3% or something like that that goes to urban Indian health center contracts, and with more than half of the Native population being urban population, there's like a clear disconnect there. And then I wanted to mention too, when you, knowing that you're a OBGYN, I meant to say this much earlier, that one of the things that I've done in the house is I joined the Black Maternal Health caucus. There's a caucus, and I don't know how many members there are of us, but we introduced, I was going to say proposed, we introduced a series of bills. We called it the Momnibus. I can't take credit for that amazing name. I think it was Lauren Underwood, and she's been a real leader in the House with the Black Maternal Health Caucus, and especially with the freshman class. And I introduced a portion called the Data to Save Moms Act, and some of it is just making sure, one, that the timelines and timeframes that we look at, only looking at months when it should be a year of making sure that we're thinking about maternal health and infant mortality rates and that sort of thing, and really getting the data for the true impact of what I also believe is a crisis. It should not be in this country that particularly Black women, like knowing that when you look at across the board, regardless of socioeconomic status, access to health insurance and population centers, all these things that like we still see an unacceptable, alarming rate of maternal mortality. And so anyway, I think that like this is one of those places where just trying to make sure that the Native community is showing up and that we're kind of doing like a united front of trying to address this issue.
I love that. Honestly, they often overlap what you see in our African American population. I think we see also in our Native population. So it's good that it's being acknowledged and addressed. Appreciate your efforts in that. I think we can go on to our next question, which was, can you tell us about your and your team's work with local hospitals and policymakers to reduce the impact of the pandemic on Kansas?
Well, some of what we've tried to do is make sure that, first of all, making sure that our office is available to our hospital systems and also to healthcare providers. And I think that one of the things that is maybe too often missed when you've got a member of Congress or a federal level elected is really just trying to make sure that you're actually like hearing directly from the community, because everything, stuff can seem like everything's 50,000 foot view, but really when it comes to access to personal protective equipment, access to testing, trying to figure out the ways that some of the stuff that slows these things down is actually at the federal level, but it's the local folks who have to deal with that. And so just trying to make sure that we have folks on the team like Kate in our office is constantly reaching out, asking questions. One of the things that we've done is try to make sure that we understand, with the CARES funding, or even before that, the Families First coronavirus relief package that we had. And one of the things that we try to do is make sure that when it comes to legislation, that we're asking, our different providers and healthcare systems to give us feedback. This is what we think this piece of legislation is going to do. How's that going to help or maybe hurt the work you're doing? And then there's constituent services elements to this as well, which is making sure that, when it comes to getting, there's some things that are structured like grants. There are some things that are, it seems like, hey, we were supposed to get this amount of funding, or we were supposed to get an allocation of PPE from the stockpile. Like there were things like that were going on that our office was just kind of in constant communication, trying to get, FEMA or HHS to just be responsive. And, unfortunately with the federal government, surprise, surprise, it ends up being red tape. Sometimes it's just literally knowing which number to call, and then you call them and then they're like, oh yeah, here it is. And then an application is moved through. And so I'd say those are probably like the two big areas where we try to I'm sure there's a lot more stuff. And Kate, who I think is on here somewhere in our office, is doing a phenomenal job trying to keep us connected. But please never hesitate to reach out to our office. You should always, like, my job is to represent y'all. So reach out, let us know if there's something that we should know about, something we should be doing.
Thanks. And so I think the next question is still kind of about that COVID-19. It's a very big hot topic.
Oh yeah.
Because, you know, we're just in a pandemic. So I think the next one was just kind of what initiatives are we planning going forward with our COVID-19 pandemic in Kansas?
You know, my biggest priority right now is trying to figure out ways that we can get a bipartisan relief package done. You know, I feel like anytime I get the chance to talk to any of my colleagues, I feel like I'm waving my arms around and saying, like, we gotta stay at the table. We gotta get this thing negotiated. We've been able to do it before, so I know it's possible. But I do think that you know, particularly seeing on the Senate side, like Mitch McConnell has walked away a number of times. The president has, and like the Senate passed and the president signed the relief packages that we've done before, which is why I know we can do it. But, you know, having the president say, we're not doing a deal, we're doing a deal, we're not going to do it. Like, that's not how you get stuff done. So I've been so frustrated, and I feel like I'm putting it mildly for all the way that, like, folks are actually feeling about it, because this is exactly the kind of stuff that makes people wonder, like, why are we sending anybody to DC if y'all can't get a package done? Like, people are struggling to get food on the table, that unemployment relief, the state and local funding so that our schools and, you know, frontline, just the police and firefighters and, like, all the essential services that our state and local governments provide, you know. So I think that we need to get, those things need to be in a package. And then, of course, more, as we see this vaccine, the conversation about the vaccine going forward, it looks like there are now 3. I think this morning we saw there's a third vaccine that's starting to look really promising. And I think that, like, one of the things we have to make sure of is that there's some equitable distribution of the vaccine, because you know, it can't be that just only the most well-connected people are getting access to a vaccine.
Yeah, very well stated. Representative Davids, I really appreciate you mentioning that people can just reach out to you. Before I go to the next question, could you just mention what is the best way for our audience? Do you like social media, email, telephone calls? What would you recommend for reaching out?
So there's a couple of things I would say. One, if you have, like, so first of all, our office can help with just, like, navigating the federal government. It sounds like a big thing, but when I say that, I mean things like issues with Medicare or Social Security. I always say we can't pay your taxes, but if there's, like, some kind of hang up with the IRS, reach out to us. Like, there are things like that. We have a person on our staff who is dedicated to working on veterans issues, navigating the VA, active duty service members, that sort of thing. I mean, passports, not that we're traveling abroad right now, but when we are, you know, passports, like all those kinds of things. If what you're doing is trying to work with the federal government or some department on something, and there's a hang up or anything, our office can try to help with that. The best way for that kind of stuff is there's on the website, which is just davids.house.gov. There's a form on there.
Okay.
You can also call our offices, and we're all doing maximum work from home, but we're still answering the phones, we're still getting the voicemails. So you can call our office, and we have, Kate, can you put it in the chat box, the phone numbers, and then the davids@house.gov? And then when it comes to, so that's like getting a hold of us for all our constituent services and everything. If there's like policy issues and, you know, you hear about a piece of legislation and you're like, where is my member of Congress on this piece of legislation? You can also call our office about that. It'd probably be faster to call the DC number because all the legislative stuff happens in our DC office. And it depends on what the topic is, but it could be that that's the way we find out about a piece of legislation that we end up co-sponsoring and helping to push forward. Because it's surprising really how many pieces of legislation are getting introduced in the US House. I think there's like 8,000 bills this year or something that got introduced. We've passed hundreds, but a lot of bills get introduced. And so, did I say this earlier? Surprise, surprise, members of Congress don't know everything. It's really helpful actually for us when constituents call and say, hey, I heard about this bill. Are you supporting it? And that might be the first time that we hear about it. So then we run all the traps. We do our diligence on it. We'll look at read through the legislation. We write a memo about it. We check to see if it's bipartisan or not. We check to see how much money it costs. Depending on the topic, we'll reach out to people in the district and say, hey, we're looking at this piece of legislation. We're evaluating it. How do you think this would impact you? And so that's actually some of the ways that we find out about the legislation that we end up co-sponsoring. So those are the top ways. I mean, you can tag us on Twitter and stuff, but the best way to really get like constituent services and talk to us about legislation is to just reach out directly to our office.
Very helpful. Thank you. I mean, I didn't realize 8,000 proposed.
I didn't.
That's tremendous.
I didn't realize either that it was that many.
Oh, bless your hearts. That's a lot to dig through. You know, the next question I love because the person who posted wants to know what in your background and you know, in your life experience, do you now see has prepared you to be who you are, but also to deal with a pandemic. I mean, who would have thought, right? And someone else mentioned in the chat your martial arts and competitiveness, and they wanted to know how that also has come into play with your success. So,
that's a really great question. So for sure, the MMA has had a huge impact. So one of the things I'll say is, I am a person who I consider myself to be a martial artist who has had fights. There are some people who are like brawlers who learn martial arts. I've always been just kind of like, when I started learning martial arts, I kind of fell in love with the journey of training, of learning. And there's a couple of things. So running for office is very much like getting ready for a fight. And I say that because first of all, everything that decides whether you win or lose happens well in advance of the night of the fight or the election. You know, everything from doing your 5 a.m. cardio workouts that nobody loves, you know, to sitting down and doing the having to watch some public speaking thing that I did. Like, it's uncomfortable. I don't want to do it, but it's also the way that I see, okay, I've got this weird tick or, you know, whatever, like just getting better at the things, being able to take constructive feedback. I learned how to do that through martial arts. The thing is, in martial arts, you know, the constructive feedback is getting hit in the face and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that again. I should have moved, or I should have done this or that. You know, so it's kind of just like recognizing it's a lot of hard work, but if you're doing all the stuff that you're supposed to be doing in advance, then you know, that's what really determines the night of. And then I think some of the best or most applicable skills, at least in terms of navigating what it's like to be a member of Congress, came from all those kind of like the wide variety of jobs I was doing when I was working my way through school. I mean, I got my first job when I was a junior in high school, and it wasn't until I got to law school, that was the first time I ever didn't have a job. And so I worked at Sonic for 5 years. I was a car hop and then assistant manager. I worked at both the Sonics in Leavenworth. I worked at 3 of the Sonics in Olathe. You know, I just, and there's a bunch of stuff that I learned from doing that. I was a banquet bartender at the Marriott. I, you know, delivered pizzas. I just had all kinds of different jobs and learned a ton about like how to get stuff done and customer service, and that it matters if you listen to people, that kind of stuff. I think that's probably the most in terms of like job experience and being able to, I feel like recognizing like what, sometimes it's like recognizing what matters and what people are talking to me about.
I love that answer so much. I'm going to make my children listen to this recording. Everything you've said is about success in life, really. And I love the connection to being an athlete and playing sports and that discipline and training that you've called upon and how it relates to everything you do. And then how every job you've held has impacted your ability to be in the position that you are now, and especially the listening to people. That is like the magical, I think, you know, that's the magical component for success. So thank you for that. Such a powerful, such a great answer. I love it.
Oh, thanks. And yes, I did the roller skate.
You did.
Well, I think our time is getting close to the end. I think we have maybe time for one more question. Appreciate you telling us all about your history. I feel like a lot of relatable things. Been working since I was 16. I think my first job was a waitress. So that was a very important job for my future, I feel like. But I think the last one we should close on is just like, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, you know, your inspiration to me, I'm sure many other Native American women. What advice would you give to young women following in your footsteps going forward?
Well, I usually give the same 2 pieces of advice. The first one, it sounds kind of funny, but hear me out. Take naps. There's a couple of things. It depends on how old sometimes when I talk to little kids, I'm like, take naps while you can, because when you get older, it's going to be few and far between, and you're going to wish you had them. And it's a common misconception that when you're a grown-up, you get to decide what you do with your day. 4-year-olds don't really hear me too much, but 8-year-olds, I think they get it. And then no, but really, when I say that, I think the biggest thing is just like, and we're seeing it now more than ever, like this is such a traumatic time in our country, in the world, in our communities. Like everybody's life has been changed in one way or another, and then you know, for some people, the long overdue conversation about racial justice, for some people it's stacking on top of this pandemic that we're in, but for a lot of people the pandemic is stacking on top of the impact of racial injustice and in this country. And so like there's just like literally multiple traumas that are going on, and to say take naps is kind of a somewhat simplified way of like us figuring out how do we kind of take care of ourselves in this time where it's just really hard. And then the second thing is that like we all get to decide for ourselves what success means. And you know, I often think about how the reason that I finished my bachelor's degree was because I wanted to be a person who finishes what I start. And I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do necessarily. It's why it took me 4 years to get an associate's degree, and then 4 more years to get a bachelor's degree. But I did know I want to be a person who finishes what they start. And it might take me 4 years, it might take me 8 years, but I'm going to finish this thing that I started. And then I realized I wanted to try to go to law school. You know, so it wasn't necessarily that I said, to me, success means going to law school. For a little while, success to me meant finishing something that I started, getting my associate's degree, and then getting my bachelor's degree. And, you know, so I think that that's a really important piece, because people tell us all the time what we should be doing, what we should care about, what we should value, what we should want. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily align with what's going to help us thrive. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you. I would love to take more naps. I have like 3 kids who never let me nap anymore. But that is true. Self-care is a big deal. I think that concludes our time, right, Kim? So I think
Dr. McGee.
Absolutely. First, so again, afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I first want to thank Representative Davids. Thank you for such a thought-provoking message today, and for all of your work on voting, all of your work around COVID-19, and all of your work on murdered and missing Indigenous women. I think we can all, we were all touched by your personal story today. I can tell you I was, because when you talked about constructive feedback, I was sent 2 text messages today that said, Geraldine, fix your face, we're live. And I try to tell people there's nothing wrong. I'm probably just thinking, I've been told that on Zoom, I don't know how many times, so obviously I need to fix it. But secondly, I want to thank all of you for joining us today in honor of Native American Heritage Month. We had a month-long of events and wanted to close out today honoring this month with our state representative, Sharice Davids, who proudly shares this heritage. America is a vast land of many cultures dating back thousands of years to the original inhabitants of the land, Native Americans. Recognition of the history, heritage, culture of the Indigenous persons is essential to American history. To our Native American employees, our students, our colleagues, our friends, families, partners, community members, as the traditional stewards of this soil, we honor you this month We honor you today, and we honor you every day. I also want to thank our outstanding planning committee led by Kimberly Connolly and Jeff Burdell for all of their hard work in pulling this together. I also want to thank our KUMC graphics team. They did an amazing job with the artistry. A special thanks to Ryan Gold for bringing forth this incredible idea for connecting us with Representative David's team. And also thank you to Robert McCormick for his contributions to pulling this together. To our participants, we hope you enjoyed our special event today. The assessment link will be emailed to you, so please be sure to complete it. And lastly, we could not do this without Alexa, Stacy, Christine, and Antoinette. So we want to thank you as well. And thank you to each of you, and thank you all. Thank you to our Native American colleagues. Again, we appreciate you, everything that you do, everything that you are, and for being resilient in everything that you stand for. We stand with you. We hope to see you all next year, and have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much, and thanks for the conversation today. I really appreciated this.
It was good. Thank you.